One of the most frequent elements in cyberpunk media is the existence of non-human species, whose existence nevertheless resembles that of humanity. Examples include Motoko Kusanagi in Ghost in the Shell, who is a cybernetic human unrestrained by her physical form. And then there's the replicants on Blade Runner, biosynthetic androids that are nearly indistinguishable from humans. Most of these narratives take care in establishing a clear contrast between the humans and the artificial ones, thereby calling into question the very concept of humanity. What defines a human being? Can something man-made be or become human? This question is frequently found in these same media, including the examples mentioned above. The goal of this essay is to contribute to the discourse on humanity in cyberpunk fiction, more specifically through an analysis of the video game series Xenosaga as a case study. Barring humans, Xenosaga presents 4 distinct species that possess a clear sense of self. Each and every one of them is based on a specific portrayal of the same concept in a certain other science fiction work. Since the plot of the entire trilogy is conveyed through cutscenes, animated sequences that follow the same techniques as CG animated films, the analysis will be conducted according to the principles of film analysis. Elements of gameplay won't be considered as they are irrelevant to the research question. Since the subject of various species' ideas of humanity plays a central role in the series' narrative, Xenosaga is an excellent subject for the investigation of this particular concept. The core question that this analysis aims to answer is as follows. What differentiates those species from humans within the specific context of Xenosaga, and how is this expressed through cinematic means? This thesis will primarily be focused on select scenes from Xenosaga Episode 1 and 2, and will be analyzing them both cinematically and narratively, such as through their dialogue, camera work, staging, and other cinematic techniques. The main section is divided into 2 parts. The first part is going to be introducing the 4 central species, describe their differences, and relate them to the thematic patterns from other works. The second part presents the actual scene-based analysis, which is going to connect the findings to the concept of humanity. For this purpose, scientific texts will also be considered for the analysis, including those by Jean-Pierre Fortin on the Blade Runner series and Donna Haraway's Cyborg Manifesto. Aside from the humans themselves, Xenosaga presents 4 non-human species that possess a consciousness: Realians, Cyborgs, Androids, and the U.R.T.Vs. The series is aware of the Fermi paradox, the paradox that despite all probabilistic factors, no traces of extraterrestrial life have yet been found. This paradox originates from the considerations of physicist Enrico Fermi, and has been discussed in texts such as Where is Everybody? An account of Fermi's question by Eric M. Jones. Accordingly, the species in Xenosaga are all human creations, designed in the image of their own form. This is an allusion to the religious portrayal of humanity in the creation myth, such as in Genesis 1:27. So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. The comparison to the religious is both present narratively and cinematically, and will be explored in greater depth during the analysis. The species with the least relevance in Xenosaga are the Cyborgs. Their portrayal correlates to the common understanding of the concept, which Donna Haraway defines as a hybrid of machine and organism, a creature of social reality, as well as a creature of fiction. However, by the time the story of the main trilogy starts, cyborgs are already considered outdated. Originally, they were used as a means to revive deceased organ donors as cyborgs. This process, however, deprived them of their human rights. The most relevant example is the main character Ziggurat-8, also known as Ziggy, a former police officer named Jan Sauer, who was transformed into a cyborg after committing suicide. This portrayal is based on the film RoboCop, whose protagonist suffers a similar fate. Xenosaga thus presents cyborgs as an illustration that humanity is something that can be taken from an individual. The extent of that deprivation, however, will be explored in the analysis. Brave New Words, the Oxford Dictionary of Science Fiction, defines the term android as an artificial being that resembles a human in form, especially one made from flesh-like material, as opposed to metal or plastic. 2 of the 4 non-human species in Xenosaga fit this description. Crucially, they are distinguished by a central aspect: the artificial intelligence that governs their behavior. The species, simply referred to as android, is explicitly a rigid instruction-driven AI. These androids are programmed to follow specific instructions and do not spontaneously exhibit emotions or other reactions that are not part of the directive. The novel Tomorrow's Eve by Villiers de Isle-Adam serves as a central inspiration for this type of android. The primary example of this is the character KOS-MOS, a military android in the form of a human woman. Although strictly bound by her directives, she occasionally displays traces of emotion. Thus, with its androids, Xenosaga raises the question of whether even beings seemingly lacking in feelings can develop a form of humanity. The other form of androids in Xenosaga are the so-called Realians. Unlike the androids described previously, they possess partially organic bodies and an artificial intelligence that is constantly evolving, growing, and learning. They are virtually indistinguishable from humans and have their own personalities, interests, and feelings. Nevertheless, they are still man-made, which is why it is possible to override their will and compel them to act. The central inspiration for their portrayal is the replicants from Blade Runner, although it should be noted that the terminology also differs. In Philip K. Dick's short story, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, which is the basis for Blade Runner, this species is simply referred to as androids. The renaming of the androids to replicants, or in Xenosaga's case, Realians, creates a more profound effect. Both of them are separated from the purely mechanical origins by their names, and thus brought closer to the human. By the end of the Xenosaga trilogy, Realians obtain human rights, and the trilogy displays their struggle to gain those. This transforms the discrimination against them from a case of speciesism into an issue reminiscent of racism. The main character of this species is MOMO Mizrahi, a Realian who, in narrative, is based on a deceased person and carries the memories of this person solely in her subconsciousness. This makes her similar to the character Rachel in Blade Runner, whose personality was also shaped by the memories of another human being. The difference, however, lies in the fact that Momo is aware of being a Realian from the very beginning, a central aspect of their conflict as the story unfolds. Jean-Pierre Fortin emphasizes in his analysis of the Blade Runner films the importance of memory for the identity formation of the artificial beings, saying, quote, "Memory is the human person's access and link to herself and reality. Without it, no one and nothing is and feels human and real over time." We can apply this directly to Momo. Although she is aware of her artificial nature, the implanted memories give her access to a form of her past that shapes her self-understanding, and much like Rachel, confronts her with the question of how these memories constitute her identity. These Realians raise the same question about humanity as Blade Runner. Can humanity be redefined and develop naturally? The last non-human species of relevance are the U.R.T.Vs, or Udu retroviruses. These are a group of 669 biological clones of the same individual, scientist Dmitry Yuryev, genetically engineered during their conception to develop special abilities. For this reason, they are also referred to as designer children, a term whose primary inspiration comes from the novel Brave New World by Aldous Huxley. Because they are born, they are the species most similar to humans. However, they are not entitled to human rights. They exist solely to fulfill their task for which they were bred, which in this respect makes them similar to androids. Their special abilities also lead to consequences that further call their own humanity into question. The central figure of this species is the party member U.R.T.V. 666 Gaidon Kukai Jr., also known as Rubedo. He is a designer child whose sole role was to guide and assist the others in their tasks. His inability to achieve this, and the resulting consequences thereof, form the core of his sub-narrative. The U.R.T.Vs thus introduce the final question of humanity relevant for this thesis. Can an individual truly be born without humanity? And to what extent can awareness of one's origins alter this understanding of one's own self? Now that we have defined the four species, we are able to move on to the analytical part of this work. However, it is important to note first that Xenosaga's party moves together as a group for most of its narrative. Nevertheless, the analytical half of this thesis will be structured according to the individual characters. These scenes are then related to the respective understanding of humanity as it pertains to their species. Since relevant aspects for the analysis of multiple species are often found within the same scenes, all elements that elaborate to the understanding of humanity will be considered, despite the focus on a specific character. Possibly the most important scene for the analysis of Ziggy is his introduction into the narrative in Xenosaga Episode 1, The Village zur Macht, hereinafter simply referred to as Xenosaga 1. Right from the start, the characters establish a contrast between themselves, the humans, and the cyborg. Ziggy is evaluated and judged by the exclusively human committee members, and his backstory is discussed despite his presence not being there. The camera work in this sequence is consistently characterized by its movement. Initially, the committee members are shown in a panoramic shot, executed as a top shot with a wide-angle lens. The shot establishes them as a collective unit that only functions through their joint actions. The meeting room with them inside of it consists of pale beige and brown tones, and is introduced as a site of bureaucratic decision-making. The camera perspective then shifts to a medium shot from a slight overhead angle before zooming in on a specific character in a medium close-up shot from a normal perspective. Until Ziggy's appearance, the camera alternates between this close-up shot and the panoramic version of the same. In the latter, however, at least two committee members are always within the same frame. This framing establishes both their representation of their individuality as well as their function as a group. Three members are particularly relevant, serving as a contrast between Ziggy and the humans. The first wears glasses, which suggest a visual impairment. The second smokes a cigarette, a sign of a possible nicotine addiction, and the third holds a walking stick, indicating age-related mobility issues. The camera work deliberately focuses attention on these three figures as they embody human handicaps that Ziggy, due to his largely mechanical body, is spared. This contrast further separates him from humanity, and right from the start of his introduction, raises the question of how physical integrity and humanity are connected. This is made clear upon his entry, where a shift between high and low camera angles highlights first his mechanical torso, then his mechanical legs. Through this, the camera perspective underscores the hybrid nature of his existence. A contrast is also created between the committee and Ziggy through color. The color palette of the entire room consists, as mentioned prior, of pale beige and brown tones, body colors reminiscent of Earth and transience. The committee's clothing is in darkened, muted hues, creating a low contrast with the surroundings and allowing them to blend into the surface of the room. Ziggy's body and clothing, meanwhile, contain traces of this darker palette, but are punctuated by bright silver and red accents, light colors that appear as reflections on his metallic surface. This color in itself contrast between the earthy tones of the humans and Ziggy's technical colors also establishes him coloristically as a hybrid being of human and machine. This depiction corresponds to Haraway's definition of a cyborg as presented in section 2.1. The arrangement of the characters also creates a clear boundary between the two species. Ziggy's encirclement creates a process-like effect, and with few exceptions, he is present in every shot. The composition is always arranged so that the humans are in the foreground, with Ziggy at the center of the scene. An asymmetrical yet stable composition that emphasizes his isolation within the group. Despite his height, the humans never look up at him either to make eye contact. Their gazes run past him or over him. Instead, he is meant to look down at them. The relationship between the axis of action and the axis of gaze suggests a hierarchy. However, this is countered by his position without rights. He is presented as a being who can only follow instructions, as his own statement makes clear. Nevertheless, this dynamic is interrupted as soon as he asks the committee to have his memories removed after his mission. At this moment, the mise-en-scène changes. He gazes melancholically at the ground. The camera moves slightly, isolating him in a close-up from the rest of the group. The line of sight is now lowered. The axis of action leads into the void, a clear indication of his remaining humanity, which is tormented by his memories. This can be traced back to Fortin's point quoted in 2.3. Ziggy's request to have his memories removed would thus definitely deprive him of his humanity. As is explained after he leaves, replacing his brain would legally declare him dead. This wording is relevant because the committee is aware that he is trying to achieve his desire for redemption through death. Xenosaga presents the idea that humanity can be taken away by completely relinquishing one's own consciousness. The most relevant scene for Momo in this analysis is found in cutscene 26 from Xenosaga episode 2 Jenseits von Gut und Böse, hereinafter referred to simply as Xenosaga 2. Unlike the previously analyzed scene with Ziggy, the camera work here has less analytical value. Yet significant stylistic devices can still be identified. In the first half of the scene, the composition consistently focuses on either Momo or Ziggy. They are shown alternatingly in the close-ups, while the other character is present in a two-person shot or as part of the background. This framing establishes a clear connection between them, expressing familiarity despite their different species. The staging underscores their central character development over the course of the trilogy, in which Momo becomes a daughter figure for Ziggy, while Ziggy increasingly assumes a fatherly role for her. They fill the roles for each other that are missing in their respective lives, an undeniable human relationship born of empathy. This is emphasized by Momo's attempt, in the current situation, to find similarities with Ziggy. When she discusses the act of undergoing maintenance, she states, despite the memories implanted in her, Momo is able to further develop her own humanity while simultaneously helping Ziggy regain his. This correlates to an aspect that 14 identifies as central to the humanization of artificial beings. The desire to become human and act as a genuinely human and humane person forms the necessary precondition for and that which sustains the lifelong self-formation process that is human existence. Momo's question to Ziggy testifies to precisely this desire to compare her own experience with that of another, thereby seeking confirmation of her own existence. As the scene progresses, Momo is once again confronted with her distance from humanity. Despite knowing and understanding that she is a Realian, she is emotionally affected by the fact that her feelings are a process that can be switched off. Although she possesses human rights, she is still not a real human being, and humans demonstrate this to her, whether consciously or unconsciously. Reaching out to Ziggy is emblematic of her attempt to grasp at the proof of her own humanity. The camera keeps Momo in focus throughout this entire scene, mostly in close-up or medium shots, which underscores her vulnerability and her need for validation. Towards the end of the scene, this treatment is placed in a religious context by Junior, indirectly raising the question of whether humans even have the right to deny them humanity in this way. As he states, which leads back to the religious points discussed in chapter 2. For the character of KOS-MOS, this analysis will be examining scene 90 from Xenosaga 1. While this scene ostensibly focuses on Momo and Shion, it is particularly relevant to the purpose of this work because of KOS-MOS' small role. It provides an example of KOS-MOS acting contrary to her programming and performing an action resembling empathy. Here Momo feels her humanity is suppressed by her creator's actions, while Shion tries to cheer her up. As a human, however, Shion is unable to fully understand Momo's feelings. Instead, she attempts to approach them by rationalizing them from a different context, one that has directly benefited humans. When KOS-MOS speaks, her gaze remains fixed not at Momo, the actual victim, but at Shion, a subtle indication that KOS-MOS is basing its reaction on the human figure it is meant to represent. Just as Shion can only perceive the situation from a human perspective, KOS-MOS approaches the event solely from the perspective of a military weapon. She's unaware of why she acted with a gesture resembling empathy. Nevertheless, this is a clear sign of a developing humanity within her.
現在は人間関係の円滑化が必要とされるフェーズではないと思われますが、お役に立てたのなら幸いです。
The lighting in this sequence is particularly of note. A distinctly noticeable shadow lies over Shion and Momo in this scene, underscoring their somber mood and the emotional weight of the moment. KOS-MOS, on the other hand, is set apart from the background by the lighting. The contrast carries symbolic meaning. This machine, which is actually denied any emotionality, appears here as the one that radiates clarity and an unexpected form of care amidst human despair. Once again, we can invoke 14 here, because much like in Blade Runner, empathy is precisely what constitutes humanity. KOS-MOS acts humanely here, without knowing it, and exactly therein lies a deeper humanity than in many conscious decisions. The final scene this paper will examine is cutscene 34 from Xenosaga 2, in which the character Junior plays the central role. Junior addresses his relationship with his brothers, particularly the immortality of his brother Albedo. The concept of humanity is processed differently by the characters in the scene and interpreted through their specific species context, clearly expressing their individual forms of humanity. Ziggy speaks first, as he is the closest to Albedo due to his own experiential background. He compares his situation to his own, analyzed in chapter 3.1, alluding to his own transient humanity and his desire for redemption.
死は魂の休息。そう言ったのは誰だったかな。肉体は死なず、精神の負う恐怖だけを積み重ねていくとしたら、もはや世界は永遠の牢獄でしかない。
At the beginning of his speech, the camera shows him in a close-up, but then switches to a traveling shot at eye level, which places all of the participants in the conversation at the center of the composition. During this moment, there is no eye contact between any of the characters, representative of their inability to consider the situation outside of their own perspective. They are incapable of seeing eye to eye, literally. Their lines of sight pass each other, underscoring the isolation of each individual within their specific perception. Afterwards, Shion speaks, a simple human who is unable to grasp the magnitude of the emotional strain Albedo is under. Instead, she argues that the reconciliation between the brothers must be possible through the communication and empathy. She can only view the situation from a human perspective of life and death, a perspective shaped by finitude and the hope for interpersonal resolution. She argues on the level of Brotherhood, thereby attributing to Junior an empathetic humanity that she considers universally effective. Finally, Junior himself addresses the situation, arguing that as Albedo's other half and as the leader of the group, it was his duty to stay by his side. He feels that he has left Albedo down. He is unable to view the situation objectively, and it appears to him solely as a failure of his own existence. This fraternal bond inherent in this scene alone is clear indication of Junior's humanity, which is influenced by the role assigned to him at birth. In this analysis, 14 emphasizes that the capacity to take responsibility for others and to define oneself in rational terms is a central characteristic of human identity formation. Junior's guilt towards Albedo stems precisely from this relational self-positioning. He defines himself not only through his programmed role, but also through the emotional bond with his brother. This is further emphasized by the camera work during his speech. Junior is never the sole focus of this composition. Initially, he is shown only in a medium close-up before the camera switches to a traveling shot from a high angle. This perspective underscores the distance the other characters have from his inner turmoil. They could never meet him on equal terms because they cannot fully comprehend his very specific way of being. The bird's eye view visually isolates him from the group and emphasizes his emotional isolation amidst his attempt to articulate his paternal responsibility. It is thus understandable that despite his own understanding of this, Junior is undoubtedly human. In conclusion, Xenosaga presents various facets of humanity by using its 4 non-human species, which, through the analysis of key scenes, lead to clear insights into their respective aspects of humanity. The cyborg illustrates that humanity can never be completely taken from an individual as long as consciousness is preserved. It is present even in the smallest stirrings and can always be rebuilt. The analysis of the android shows that where the possibility exists to develop empathy, humanity can unfold even from strict directives. The Realians demonstrate that while memories are fundamental for the development of consciousness, it is the experience of the present that enable humanity to evolve and forge authentic human connection. Finally, the U.R.T.Vs illustrate that humanity is inherent in every being that possesses consciousness. The circumstances of one's creation or birth are entirely irrelevant. Humanity proves not to be a fixed characteristic of a species, but rather an expression of consciousness, the capacity to develop empathy, and the ability to connect with other beings. This thesis, with its focus on Xenosaga, is designed as a single case study, which necessarily limits its scope. Nevertheless, it can serve as a starting point for future analyses of the concept of humanity in other cyberpunk and science fiction narratives, be it in film, literature, or even video games. The categories and questions developed here can be applied to other works and could contribute to a deeper understanding of how speculative fiction continually renegotiates the boundaries of humanity.